Yeah, let's just start by me admitting that I'm bad with names. So why don't we all just introduce ourselves? How are you involved with the Iron Claw? Elle, why don't you start, and we'll go
I'm
clock.
Elle Favorule, and I was the makeup department head on Ironclaw.
I'm Natalie Shea Rose, and I was the hair department head on Ironclaw.
And my name's Jennifer Starzyk. I am the costume designer on Ironclaw, and I had got involved in it through working. Elle and I have a similar story there. We both worked on the staircase, and Antonio Campos and Sean Durkin used to have a production company together, and he had shared our names with Sean, and luckily it all worked out.
Okay. Well, first of all, Iron Claw. It's in my top 3 movies of the year, and myself, a big wrestling fan. I'm not as familiar with the Von Erich story as I should be, but I've always known them, and I've known the story of the family, and I'm so grateful for this film. But let's just start. I'm just curious. When you were offered or approached about the Iron Claw, what were kind of the opportunities or the challenges you saw in the film that made you want to do it?
I think for me, I wasn't as familiar with the Von Erichs, but I did kind of have a foray into wrestling. I worked on the Robert Rodriguez show, Lucha Underground.
Oh yeah.
And so I knew, one, what a challenge the wrestling scenes were going to be for us and for the actors. But I took it as like a challenge that I was like, oh, this is something that I would love to, be a part of. And then once I really got to know the story, I was so fascinated by the determination of the father and the brotherhood between the boys. And I feel very lucky to have been a part of this and to be able to help tell the story. And just in terms of challenges, I think just the physicality of it. Obviously, as a makeup artist, our work is usually on people who are standing and talking or maybe sometimes fighting, but they were filming 10, 15, 20-minute wrestling matches over and over and over again. And making sure that your work could withstand that was a challenge that I was excited to take on.
I mean, was that something you had dealt with before? Or, I mean, with Lucha, I would imagine it's the same thing.
Yeah, but Lucha, actually, we didn't have to cover like their tattoos or anything like that because they were their actual characters. And so however they came, we did their hair and makeup, but however they came is how they showed up. So they were allowed to show certain things. And because we were creating characters for, Zach, Jeremy, and Harris, we really had to make sure that they looked like the boys. And so, between the tattoo cover and the body makeup and things like that, that was kind of the challenging part for us because there was going to be a lot of movement.
Yeah. How about you, Natalie?
I mean, for me, it was definitely I've done a couple biopics before. Like I did American Underdog, so the Kurt Warner story. So same thing where I've had to do wigs to match somebody, which is always a challenge, but it's definitely a more exciting challenge because you are matching somebody that's real, like in real life, but you're also trying to make the actual actor look as similar to that person without just like absolutely making the wig perfectly match because that doesn't necessarily look good on the actor, So like there were certain colors that like Kevin had with his hair, like he was very blonde at certain points that like it wouldn't have worked with Zach's skin tone. So just little things like that it's like you kind of have to figure out how can I blend this and get like so I give a nod to the fans because especially for me, I did have a little bit of a wrestling background. But mostly when I was a little kid and only for a brief minute before my mom was like, okay, you and your brother need to stop watching wrestling because you're tearing apart the house.
Yeah, well, I mean, were wigs for wrestling a challenge as well? I would imagine.
Oh yeah. Oh, and that was another thing. I had never done anything for wrestling. Like I did football movies, but like, we didn't have the wigs on because in the helmets you weren't really seeing it for Kurt Warner because he had shorter hair. It's like little things like that. And then but then they're like grabbing their hair and flipping off the top rope, and I was like, oh okay.
Well,
I had a ballet background, so I started out working at the Houston Grand Opera and Grand Ballet, Houston Ballet. So I had worked with like you put the wigs on and they have like 30 fuertes and flips and they're like dipping and dragging all down the costume. That was the most I had, but they never really grabbed hair the way they fit.
Well, the other thing was because I had to tell my daughter, no, Ric Flair bleeds all the time. You know, so it's common for
Oh,
him
that
to
was
have
another. Yeah, we
blood
had a
soaked
blood
hair.
wig for him because like that blonde, that platinum blonde will stain. So we were like, okay, we had to have like anything that was blonde or lighter colored. We had that wig, and then we had a blood wig because we never knew. We were like, okay, maybe in this fight they decided to be a little more bloody, and if it changes, we need to be prepared for it.
And Jen,
So
how
we
about
had a
you?
lot of wigs just like
Yeah,
in the wings.
absolutely. And Jen, how about you?
I would think quite similar. I mean, I think the whole undertaking was a bit of a challenge because it was such an exciting, dynamic project we definitely wanted to be a part of. But it also spanned about 12 years. It had an ensemble cast. Kevin has like 60 changes. You also have this wrestling scene. That scene with Holtz that takes place in 1963 was its own complete
Mhm.
thing as well, with its own background. So in order to, we had like I had a 6.5 week prep, and we had like a 6-7 week shoot. It was you had to be hyper focused to make sure you got everything done in time and executed, and hopefully elevated to the level that yourself and everybody else is expecting from you. So it was the whole thing was quite a challenge, and it was such a wonderful thing to have it come together and work with. I mean, Sean Durkin is such a beautiful, like, generous director, and Mateus and James and Elle and Natalie. Like, I think we all just, it was a really fun project. I think of it very fondly because it was enjoyable, even though it was extremely hard and very quick. And every day you were just spinning around to make it happen. And like an example of when we filmed the wedding, I believe that day we filmed 2 other scenes. We started with a funeral, and then midway
Oh
through the day
yeah.
we did something else, and we ended the day with a wedding. I mean, that was the kind of filming schedule it was. And obviously, and I've definitely discussed this, that the wrestling, the made to order for the wrestling and making sure we recreated everything. I mean, that's a costume designer's dream, but it was very difficult. You know, the bootmakers in town that work, the union bootmakers in town, Los Angeles, weren't available. I was able to find somebody. I didn't even know if he was in Mexico or Texas, but he ended up taking the project for us and made us 26 boots, had to drive it to us twice because they didn't cure in time. The trunks ended up being, you know, you thought, oh, it's a Speedos, I can just like bang this out. And that ended up being an issue. And luckily we partnered with High Spots, a vendor, and they were luckily kind enough to, we were able to give them a pattern, fabric, an illustration or a sketch or a photo, and they made the trunks for us. And then I had someone in house making those ring robes, and we filmed those scenes kind of within 2 weeks. So it was busy every day and making sure we had everything we needed. And I'm so pleased the film is doing well and it looks good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, okay, yeah. Bring it back to Ric Flair. I mean, you know, he's iconic for those robes. Was that done from scratch, or did you have, you know, did you have time to make an original one, or did you have to kind of go into the
All
the
those ring
alternate?
robes were original. There was about 21 ring robes in the show, but obviously Ric Flair is the showstopper. I mean, he's such a dynamic, over the top character. He's so fun. That was a match that was kind of not recreated based on a real match, so we had carte blanche to do what we wanted. Sean was like, pick anyone you want. They're Ric Flair. They're all
Yeah.
iconic. So, you know, luckily in the scheme of our whole overlooking at our project, I had so many primary colors on the other boys, true to life. So we picked this peacocky, you know, flamingo pink peacock robe. I mean, he dresses like Zaza Gabor meets Liberace, and he has a nickname Nature Boy.
Oh
And
yeah, he does.
like it's just like it's so indicative of wrestling. It's such an ancient, nuanced sport. They get in weird positions. It's masculine. I mean, it's just, they wear costumes. I mean, Ric Flair, I think, sums it up. So I was stoked to have made the pink robe, and obviously it looks everybody's a fan of it. It looks great. It's kind of the showstopper for the rings. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all the wrestling fans I know have just really responded to this movie, and weirdly enough, I took my daughter to see it, and she, you know, she didn't want to see it, and then it became like her third best movie of the year. I think
Oh, wow.
second best
Oh,
movie
that's
of
awesome.
the year. Yeah, sorry, Godzilla beats it out. So okay, so I'll also go into my other discussions I've had about the film, but it's the big, you know, complaint about the film is that, you know, that I think Zach, they were saying, well, Zach looked more like Carrie and Jeremy looked more like Kevin, and I realize, you know, short of, you know, doing face altering makeup and costume, you know, what were the discussions like in terms of how you develop the look of the four boys?
I think for us initially, my first question always for every director, because you know, Jen and I also had the experience on Staircase. Do you want a likeness makeup or do you want the essence of the character? And I think depending on the answer, then that's where you map out what your characters look like. And in terms of Sean Durkin, who was so gracious in his collaboration, he was like, let's get it super period appropriate, but let's get the essence of these boys. Let's make sure you feel the time period on them. And obviously, you know, when it comes to Natalie's wigs, it might have been a different conversation. But for us, it was like, let's get the essence of these boys. In that time period, no one had tattoos. Their facial hair was a certain way. Like, we really wanted to get as close to them as possible, also without it being distracting. I think if Sean had come to me and been like, we want to do prosthetics and all of this, we probably would have done some tests, and ultimately it wouldn't have been my suggestion, because I think when you have such high action and so much movement and sweat and wrestling, you're, especially with how tight our schedule was, you're kind of creating a recipe for disaster. And Sean and I were on the same page from the beginning that we really wanted to just get the essence of these boys in terms of their face and what they look like, you know, specifically relating to makeup.
Yeah, I'm curious because what, you know, I'm focusing on the word of essence. What did you guys feel, or how would you describe the essence of Kevin versus Carrie, and how you approached it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, in terms of makeup, the boys weren't really wearing that much, if any at all. It was really about like the blood moments, covering the tattoos, and you really have to take where they're at in their lives with each of them. And Kevin, we kind of pick up, and he's, you know, almost like this center force in the family, and he's working outside all day, and he's trying to run a wrestling business with his dad. And so his appearance, the same thing with Holt, their appearance isn't the first thing they think about when they wake up in the morning. Maybe more pertaining to, you know, their hair or their wrestling attire. That would be a more, I would say, focused conversation, like, let's get this exact. But for makeup, it was like, let's put them into the time in their lives. So they're on the farm, they're probably going to be tanner, they're going to be sweaty. They're, you know, Fritz was a drinker, so he was, you know, broken capillaries. We did age spots. We really kind of took his character there, in terms of his skin texture. And we did do, you know, there was a moment we did some likeness tests for Fritz to see what that would look like. And ultimately, you never want your work to be distracting from the story. And I think if a character is watching it, and, you know, Holt had mentioned something about bigger ears and pinning the ears back or pushing the ears out. And at the end of the day, you look at it on camera and you're like, you know what, that potentially is going to be distracting to viewers. And I think that's all they're going to focus on. And so those are kind of the decisions you make with your director and your DP. And I think as long as everybody is on the same page, and also the actor too, you have to take into consideration their performance, and you want them to feel comfortable in the character. And so that's kind of the direction we went, was more of like an essence for the boys in terms of where each of them were at in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Is that similarly true with Jen, with costumes? You know, are you looking for a distinct look for each one, or are you more looking for the period of that time of their life, basically?
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, I also want to, I mean, I will comment on, I actually think the casting was perfect. So I'm not too sure what the fans were expecting, except for maybe that neither of them were over 6 feet tall, because those boys were like 6'1", 6'4", 6'5".
I know, that's all we talked about was, boy, Jeremy's really short.
Yeah. So Jeremy is shorter, but I mean, he has that rock star bad to the bone vibe, and that's totally Carrie Von Erich. And I feel like Kevin was a jock with a big heart, you know, and I feel like Zach definitely portrayed that. I was very, and Harris, I mean, I think the casting's amazing, but definitely you're looking, I mean, it's a biopic, you know, everybody's doing the same thing in these biopics, Maestro, Oppenheimer, you get this baseline of reference, and everybody has research they can draw upon, but then then you blur the lines, and it becomes kind of characters and how you're going to flesh that out, because now we're telling the 5 people's lives in 2 hours, you know, so you have to have some sort of character beat. So like for us, it's like Zach was the all-American jock, and I put him in neutrals mostly because he's the grounding force throughout the film, and Carrie's the rock star in the most 80s, and he has those 80s palette and vibes, and pink and turquoise and coral and things like that, and peppy colors. And David was a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll. He's the Western guy. His ring robe looks like a Western shirt. Anything with like a Western vibe was his. So I was definitely drawing upon them. They were those guys are loaded with personality. They're very beloved. I think you couldn't be that famous without having all of the it factors. They have charisma, they have personality, they have charm, and they have the athleticism. So it sort of works all hand in hand.
Yeah. I'm curious about Michael, because correct me if I'm wrong, but was he a kind of conglomeration of Michael and Chris, or was it just Michael's story?
Yes, I mean, obviously, when you start to dive in, you learn about if you didn't know anything about the Von Erichs, you realize there was another brother that they did not bring up. And speaking with Sean, and he's definitely spoke about this in his interviews, it was just too much of another tragedy, another suicide. And they're making a movie. They have to take artistic license in a way. So not knowing much about Chris myself, I mean, Mike Stanley, who's just so adorable and such an amazing actor as well. And he is a musician, and Mike's character was into music and wanted to be a musician. So that sort of played amongst itself. And when you look at the boys, it would be like shirtless, like in trunks, and the dad would be sitting there with like his chest open and his legs spread, and then Mike would be like in a polo and corduroys, and like Sean tried to put some like tidbits in where like they'd be working out and like Mike would be like reading a book. I don't know if it got into the final cut, I can't recall, but they definitely played into him not fitting in and not wanting to get into wrestling and kind of being pulled into it and having a tragedy and not really fulfilling his life the way he would like it.
Mm-hmm. All right, and let's see. Yeah, and Natalie, in terms of the hair, are you afraid Amy's hair is going to come back because of this movie?
Actually, surprisingly, it honestly has. I've had people asking me for haircuts and asking some of my other fellow hairdressers for it. Because I have other hairdressers that are like, "We did the iron claw today on a customer."
Oh no!
Because I laughed because I was like, "Oh, I mean, true '80s hair wasn't that great. Like, it's not as like redefined as like the new mullet that we have. That's like more custom and everything. But it's making a little comeback that I was not expecting."
Yeah, now, I feel like I've got my perm today in honor of you, Natalie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now we got to have the overstarched 90s hair.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So most of our audience here is indie filmmakers. So they're working with low budgets. I'm kind of curious. I mean, do you have background in the ultra low budget, the very limited resources, and what if you had, what were kind of some of the challenges you had in your field in terms of not more than just telling, hey, just show up in whatever you have in your closet and just do your own makeup, but do you have that kind of experience?
I started my career in indie film, and I can't tell you the love that I have for an indie movie. It's where I started. It's where I learned and perfected my craft. It is the love and appreciation I have for those films that even to this day, I'll have a conversation with my agent and I'm like, hey, if we can squeeze in an indie somewhere between this and this, because at the end of the day, no one is there to make money. They are there to create a film. And I think that dedication to a project is something that brings me so much joy, because someone like Sean Durkin, for example, you would do anything for him just in terms of creating his characters or getting him the looks that he wants, because that everyone there is dedicated to making that project. And I think that's sort of the fun, when someone hands you a ton of money for a big budget and a beautiful schedule, you're like, okay, maybe we'll have a challenge here or there. But on an indie, you never know what's going to happen. I worked on indies where I was making $100 a day and we shot for 14 days straight. And we were just like, we're going to get this done and we're going to make a movie. And then it, wins awards at Sundance. And you're like, this is great. And so I will always have an appreciation, because the things that I've learned and the challenges and the fun things I've created have all been from indie film. So I will do this forever.
So what kind of advice would you give to a director? Because I would imagine that the indie filmmakers, that sometimes makeup and costume and hair are the last things they think about. It's kind of
Yeah.
low on the list. Do you have advice?
Sometimes on the budgets ones too.
Yeah. To be honest, one of the things that I feel like it's kind of a two-part thing. One is communication, and two is you kind of have to trust. Granted, I know that they can't afford to pay us prep months and months in advance, but just start having some conversations, because I think getting to know your artist and their capabilities, and then also what your expectations are, not only for your film but for your characters. And if there's a beat you really want to hit, really work with them, and communicate, but also trust that you got to give them sometimes a little bit of leeway. Like, I literally just got a call the other day for something, and they're like, is this even possible? And so now I'm going to spend the next few days working it out to see if it is. And you kind of just have to trust your people with the right communication and guidance. I think, you can create amazing things, but I really do think it's a huge team effort.
Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, makeup is not solely about the look of the character, but it's also camera. How you shoot for film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so when you say, is this possible? What are kind of the roadblocks that, or the red flags that an indie filmmaker needs to consider? What are things that they need to consider further ahead of time than they do?
I mean, the two main things are budget and time constraints. Some things, like whether it's a prosthetic effects gag or a blood gag, let's say it's a blood gag. I have to go to Jen and I have to say, hey, can we afford to do 5 doubles? They want to be able to do this 5 times. And she's like, okay, let me see if I can work this into the budget. And then I go to Natalie and I'm like, hey, is so-and-so wearing a wig? Do we have doubles of that? Are we going to be able to wash it out and change it in between?
How many doubles,
It's really,
et cetera. Like, we
Yeah.
all have to work together as a team and come together on it. It's like, that's what makes it a lot more than most people realize. It's not just one individual. It's like, we all do have to work together too.
Yeah. You're not in 3 separate trailers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we are, yeah, but it is in essence making sure that the communication from the top down is the same, because there are projects that I've done that costumes gets different information than hair, than different information than makeup, and when we're not on the same page, you walk in on the day and you're like, wait a minute.
Now, how about Natalie, in terms of, do you have an indie background, and how did
yeah, I started out doing indie films for years. I actually started out in theater, and then back in when I grew up in Texas, and then I moved to New Orleans. And when I moved to New Orleans, I did indie films for years before I got in the union. So, and I mean, I loved it. I actually still do indie films for friends. Like, if I have time in between my schedule, they're like, hey, I'm shooting something over the weekend. Is there any way you can help out? I've done like little indie films and like music videos and stuff for friends still to this day, because it's so much fun, because there's so much more passion into it. Like, everybody involved is doing it because they love doing it, and or because they love the piece, they love doing it. We're all coming together just to create something together. So yeah, same, just like Elle. I mean, I started out there, and I still do a ton of indie films. So.
Yeah, I mean, because I have to imagine, again, like everything else, hair is probably down the line in terms of, they didn't think about it. What do you tell filmmakers in terms of how hair can elevate their work and their production?
Yeah, it really depends on the script, basically. I mean, the script, like, is it going to be period? Is it not? And then typically I'll like research each actor and see what they already have going on. Like, kind of like, I request like selfies, and that way I can kind of start there, get a basis, and start moving my way on through. But from the script, just being like, okay, so here's the different options. If you have stunts, okay, what stunts are we going to have? Or is the actor doing any of these stunts themselves? How many different stunt doubles are we going to have? So that, I mean, and then all that factors into a budget. So, and then, same thing. Okay, in this scene, he's working out. How sweaty do you want him? And a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. Like, or are we going to go from this to this? And here's our schedule. So like it all depends on the script and the schedule that you're given, to be like, okay, so here's our options. Like, we are starting here, or we have a color, but in the script it says they changed their color. How are we going to work that into a schedule? Are we going to do that with wigs or what? And then that becomes a factor of like, we need the time to put the wig on, and like what's the budget for a wig? Like, are we going to have a custom wig made? Do we have the budget for that or not? So there's a lot more that goes into it than
And
most people
Nat, just to bounce off what you just said, I've even had directors and writers in the stages of writing coming to me being like, hey, can I just ask, like, is this achievable at this budget? So that they know to either take the script in a different direction or rewrite something prior to it even going into pre-production, because that sometimes will save you on, in the end, because if you've got a movie that's $1 million budget and you've written in multiple fight scenes with blood and wigs and wardrobe changes and all, it's like you might be setting yourself up for failure if you are expecting, a $10 million budget with $1 million. And sometimes people can make it happen, but I just feel like the more the sooner in advance, the better the film could end up being.
Yeah. Early on in your career, was the answer always yes?
Sadly, yeah. You do what you can and you make it work. And then you look back and you're like, oh, it wasn't my best, but I tried.
Yeah. But I mean, just like life, you struggle through it and you learn a new skill, you learn a new way of doing things, and it just kind of evolves over your career at that point.
Yeah. And sometimes you learn how to say no because, in the end, it's better for everybody if it doesn't get done properly to just not do it,
So veteran makeup artists say, let's say no.
Yeah.
And how about you, Jen? What's your indie background?
My indie background is, I think, just the first couple movies I worked on were indie. Actually, the very, very first movie that brought me into the industry, I worked for George Little, who designed it, but it was a under $2,000 non-union, under $300,000. What am I talking about? $300,000 non-union film that Bryan Cranston wrote, and we shot it in Pie Town with like Pappy and Harry as our caterers, and that was it. I got bitten by the bug because I was like, who are these carny folks? And like, what are we doing? And we had to be super resourceful. I mean, we made a deal with a costume house and they let, we were able to get it done. And I mean, I personally like a variety of films. Just because a film is big budget or a blockbuster hit, that totally does not mean personally I might like that film. So I like all sorts of films. So if the script is good and the writing's good and the cast is good, great. Now, if it's also then visually interesting, then you've got like a winner. You know what I mean? Like these quiet films that actually just also look good because they have taken the time and thought to put consideration to hair, makeup, costumes, lighting, not just the cast and not just trying to get a script in so they can like get something under the belt. I think we're in a visual media and I feel like that's definitely what people should keep in mind. And you can be very resourceful nowadays. I mean, there's wonderful thrift stores and whatnot. And I think there's ways to do a film. You definitely have to collaborate if you're going to do stunts or this and that and make sure everything is being pulled off. But we are making entertainment. So I think to me, entertainment is something that excites you to look at and, thought provoking or fun to watch or took your mind off something. And that is a team effort. Like some of the best movies are 100% like Wong Kar-wai, like In the Mood for Love. Something that's just every single aspect is hit in it. And it's so visually beautiful. You don't even have to watch the movie. You can just see a still and you're like, I want to watch that movie. I think that's what is fun about our work.
Yeah. Now going to the 80s, was it a particular challenge to do the 80s, or do we still have enough clothes out there to pull it off?
We have enough clothes out there to pull it off. And the nice part is I had visited a little bit of that time frame in Mindhunter, but now going into this, instead of like a sea of vintage monochromatic cool tone suits, I'm doing people dressed that look like they're going to like a state fair and like Texas Americana, right? So you're like visiting the same time period, but you're telling a completely different story. And I think that's wonderful that we can do that in the film industry as well. Instead of going, oh, I already did a 1980s film, I don't want to do another one. Everyone, the script is going to serve its own purpose and it's going to create its own atmosphere and tone. And with that in mind, somebody that's been doing costumes for as long as I have, you do rent a lot of stuff because there's easy access. It's sized, it's clean, it's readily available, but you want to make sure you source your own clothes so that it's not a lot of things that maybe someone in the costume world can pick out. Oh, I rented that from Western Costume before in my film. So you want to make sure that you go and you also purchase a lot of things. And then if you, as a costume designer, you want to make things too. So this film was the perfect conglomeration of all that because I was able to rent. Then we went to Baton Rouge. There was like fantastic thrift stores there. I was mind blown in that. And like I would just go every weekend and gobble up at a couple of these like main stores. And then we made a lot of stuff. So definitely that's not a problem. I think when you get past the 1940s, that's when you kind of get into an issue of lack of clothing and the clothing deteriorating, like 30s and 20s gowns, right? Yes.
So do you have any tips and tricks for a low budget indie filmmaker who wants to do an 80s or 70s or 80s period piece?
Yeah, I think you should definitely thrift and look into Etsy and thrift and all these other sources that you can pull some key pieces from and make that happen. And obviously really use your eye and kind of like cull if some fast fashion right now is doing an 80s look, if you're Zara or something, like kind of just be expressive and be creative and getting it done and making it interesting as much as you can within that budget. So, and like Elle said, everybody needs to be understanding of the big picture. Like, here's what is achievable and what I can execute with your time and money and thought into it.
Yeah. Now, weirdly, but I feel like you have to travel out of LA in order to find good stuff. Am I crazy or?
No, but I feel like, LA is a mecca of thrift stores. Like there's so many like vintage and thrift stores here. It's a shopping city. What's fun is when if you get to, when you're traveling for work and you're kind of like when I worked in Pittsburgh, like when you get into these locations and you're like, what is even here? And then you stumble upon, there's always vintage fashion lovers in any city. Like, so it's really cool to see when you walk into a store and you start to have like in Mindhunter, that guy was, for season 2, it was like, here you go. Like he'd gone shopping between the hiatus to be ready for me to come back. So it was, I think there's definitely thrift stores everywhere and access to vintage for sure. I know maybe some of their parents have some pieces. I don't know, so. Yeah.
I want to bring Mindhunter back so bad. It's,
honestly, me too.
I mean, the whole, okay. And last question for Elle, wrestling, bruising, how do you track all that stuff within, does it, I think the short term is the match. How do you track bruises and things to a match? But I imagine the after effects afterwards and before is there a trick to that, or do you
one is it's making sure your script, backwards and forwards, inside and out, and also really hiring a strong team so that they also understand, because it really isn't a solo effort. You really have to guess and check your work with your team, but kind of understanding the script and then really understanding the schedule and knowing, okay, wait, Zach had a bruise in this, like after this match, we're not shooting that for 3 weeks, but the bruise is going to appear before. So then you have to start a conversation with stunts. Okay, what is the choreography of this match going to look like? How is he going to get hit? What is he getting hit with? And then what's the time frame from that match to the next time we see him, which is the first time we see the bruise. And so then you have to loop in script supervisor and your director and be like, what's the time frame from this scene to this scene? Okay, so the bruise would theoretically look like this, but if you want it, like, you basically, my favorite thing to ask is like, do you want it TV continuity or do you want it real life? Because real bruising can tend to look fake. And so you really have to know, like, do you want me to bump this up so far so that people see it and it's noticeable for camera, but realistically the time frame of the bruising wouldn't actually look like that. And so, knowing the time frame of the actual words on the page, like how far in a day or a week they're jumping between scenes, looping in, the choreography of what the actual hit looks like, even though you might not shoot that for another 3 weeks, and then really just like a fine tooth comb going through your schedule and kind of making sure you're hitting each beat, and then going back to the director and being like, when do we want this to die? Because do we want him to be bruised in the super pivotal emotional scene, or is that going to be distracting for people? And then kind of picking and choosing those moments. It's a massive coordinated effort between multiple departments.
Yeah. I have to tell you, wrestling fans look for that stuff.
Yeah. 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 And that's why I think we knew the Von Erich story was so important to so many people, but just wrestling as a whole as well is such a massive fan base. And so not only are you like up against movie buffs, but now you have a whole other group of people who you're like, okay, they are going to be paying attention to everything. So we need to make sure we're serving this story and giving it like its due and doing it justice. And I think, if I might say so myself, I think we did a great job.
No, you did. You did. I mean, we're wrestling. We're practically soap opera fans, and so we carry these things from episode to episode.
That's
Yeah.
true.
It's gotta be a shout out to your team and a shout out to A24 for making kind of like the coolest independent, bigger budget independent movies there are. Really.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for chatting. We don't normally talk to production and design teams, but I felt like this movie was the perfect film to talk about it with. So I appreciate
Thank you so much. You asked amazing questions, so thank you.
Really did.
Yeah.